I turned 70 on a wet Saturday that made the city look polished, as if someone had rinsed the streets and left them to dry. My name is Marion Hale, and I had been rehearsing this day for 3 quiet weeks, lists taped to the refrigerator, a fountain pen parked beside a stack of place cards, a new navy dress with pewter buttons that didn't so much sparkle as hold the light. 70 felt like a number you set a table for. All morning the apartment smelled of rosemary and orange peel. I rubbed butter under the skin of a roast chicken and tucked slices of lemon into the cavity, because my son once told me he must have been 12, then that lemon made chicken taste clean. I baked a cake I'd never tried before, orange blossom with vanilla bean, and iced it with a careful hand the way you smooth a child's hair before a photograph. I polished the good glasses until the faceted rims sent brief prisms onto the wall, and I laid the old linen runner down the center of the table so that its tiny stitched vines marched in a straight, hopeful line. The guest list was short and dear. Peter, my son, was coming with his wife Ava, and the children Maya, who braided friendship bracelets onto everything she loved, and Jonah, who lost one front tooth and decided to whistle with the gap. My sister Ruth had said she and Clive wouldn't miss it for the world. 8 seats felt perfect. A conversation could travel the length without getting winded. I wrote everyone's names in my neatest script and set my own card at the head, only because there was a head and heads need things. At 6 o'clock, the apartment was ready, and so was I. The candles were lit, beeswax cones that shed a honeyed scent, and a small speaker in the corner played Nina Simone under her breath. The rain had slid into drizzle. My cat Fig slept in the armchair in a posture so satisfied it could have been a lesson. I poured water into one of the good glasses and stood a moment just to look the white plates with their slight gray rims, the napkins folded into quiet boats, the chicken resting the cake proud but pretending not to be. At 6:30, the hallway was still empty. Elevators hum when they have a reason to, and ours felt contemplative. I checked my phone to make sure I hadn't invented the hour. There it was in my calendar in stubborn black letters, birthday supper 6:00 p.m. I had sent the reminder on Thursday. Peter had responded with a thumbs up that looked in that tiny square like a real thumb. At 7, I called Peter. The ring went forward, then voicemail. I tried Ava. Her recorded voice was sugar over burlap. I left a message light as possible, just checking you're on your way. The traffic's terrible in this weather, I know. Ruth didn't pick up either, which was odd. My sister answers the phone like she's catching a tennis ball. I set the phone down and told myself this is what happens on rainy nights. Cabs vanish, umbrellas snap, subways stall. I turned the oven low to keep the chicken warm and put on fresh water for the beans. At 7:30, the room had shifted in a way you can't photograph. The candles pinched shorter. The music, however sweet, made a sound like memory. I tried to picture the 8 of us as I'd pictured us since I began choosing ingredients, Maya stealing an olive, Jonah nursing a glass of lemonade like an adult, Peter reaching for the bread and laughing because I'd bought the same sesame loaf we used to eat on Sundays when money was a little thin and sweetness was the cheapest luxury. When a picture refuses to sharpen your eyes, hurt from the effort. By 8, the truth stood politely in the doorway and waited for me to notice it. I sat at the head of the table, folded my hands, and looked at the 7 empty chairs. Fig, who didn't believe in human dramas, turned onto his other side. The rain stopped. Somewhere below, a neighbor's television applauded without conviction. I reached for my phone one more time, not to call anyone, but to grant myself the small comfort of scrolling. Ava's name sat at the top of my feed because she posts frequently and in high resolution. The newest square was a panorama of turquoise water and white deck chairs. The horizon ruled almost straight. In the center stood the 4 of them, Ava in a sun hat, with a black ribbon, Peter with his arm around her, the children in matching sea green shirts that someone had planned for. Ruth and Clive appeared on the edge of the frame mid-laugh. The caption, written in a voice that did not waver, said, "Grateful for days like this." A palm tree leaned into the picture, like a friend trying to help. I looked until the image lost its lines and became blocks of color. Then I set the phone down, not because I was through with it, but because I was not. I blew out the candles carefully so the smoke trailed in thin ribbons, and for a little while the room smelled like something just ended. It would be easier, I told myself, though the telling failed to accept a mistake. Dates, miscopied plans, layered and stuck storms of logistics. But mistakes tend not to come in patterns. What is repeated is taught. The memories didn't arrive all at once. They assembled the way beads click politely along a string. There had been the spring concert at Maya's school 2 years earlier. I'd asked Ava twice about the time because I wanted to sit close enough to see my granddaughter's bow hand. "It's been postponed," she texted the night before. "Flew in the music department." That same evening, a friend forwarded me Ava's story, the gym glittering with fairy lights, Maya in a navy dress that matched nothing but it looked like confidence. The caption read, "So proud of our girl." There had been Jonah's soccer party in the park. I arrived with a wrapped book about the moon because he was in that stage where the moon followed the car. At the gate, Ava's smile found me. We had to do tomorrow instead. Field permits, what a mess. I tried to reach you. Behind her, a row of paper pennants trembled in the breeze. The children chased each other in little comets. Later, when I mentioned it to Peter, he tipped his head the way he used to when he was sure he'd lost something. No mom today was perfect. Did you change your calendar? And December. That one kept its sharpness. Peter called 2 days before to say work had sprouted emergencies and the holiday dinner should be small, just the 4 of them, and early night for the kids. I made soup and ate it, looking out at the apartments opposite, each window a little novel. The next afternoon, Ruth sent a photograph, a living room sparkling with garlands, 20 people, and the good plates, Jonah asleep on a lap, not mine. I had been telling myself a story about friction and schedules, about the complicated maps of young families that sometimes fold elders into creases by accident. But even accidents have fingerprints. The strange thing about patterns is that once you see them, they hold still for you. They no longer pretend to be weather. I cleared the table the way you gather yourself slowly, politely from the edges in. The plates made a pleasant small noise stacking on the counter, loyalty without witnesses. I slid the chicken into the refrigerator, carried the cake to its covered stand, and wiped a ring of wax from the runner with the corner of a damp cloth. The good glasses I washed by hand. Crystal sings when you turn it right in the water, a high little note that tells you it has nothing to hide. When the kitchen was in order, I stood at the doorway as if I'd arrived at someone else's home. The table runner's stitched vines looked tireless, their green threads steady as a promise. I switched off the speaker. The apartment achieved a new kind of quiet, not silence exactly, but a private weather, the gentle kind that does not ask you to speak. The phone lay face down on the counter. I wasn't afraid of it. I also wasn't prepared to touch it again. The ice in the water glass had surrendered itself to the room. When I lifted the glass, it left a small circle, a watermark shaped like a pale moon. I set the glass on the windowsill and opened the window an inch. The city sent up its usual mixture, fry grease and rain, and a taxi's brief curse, and I let it in. Fig jumped down from the chair and wound himself around my ankles, draping his plume of a tail across my calf, like a note that had found its measure. I don't know how long I stood there, only that the hallway light blinked and then held, that somewhere a door closed with a gentle certainty that the cake waited without impatience beneath its glass dome. When the candles are out, you can see the room as it truly is. Chairs that weigh what they weigh, plates that shine or do not. I ran my finger along the seam where the two halves of the runner met and felt the tiniest bump, the place where someone's thread had crossed once and then kept going. I switched off the overheads and left the small lamp by the sofa on. The navy dress, when I hung it on its hook, kept the shape of me for a second before it remembered itself. In the mirror, I did not look older than I had in the morning. I looked like a woman who had prepared a table because she believed a table could hold people together, and then watched the table hold only what she'd put on it. Fig hopped onto the bed before I had pulled back the coverlet and arranged himself as if this too had been on my list. The apartment settled. The city moved around it with its practiced grace. I lay down, and the last thing I noticed before sleep took the edges off was the faint smell of orange blossom still sweet on my hands. The apartment wore the quiet like a shawl the next morning. I made coffee in the small mocha pot because it asked you to stand there and listen to it think. Fig trailed me from counter to chair and backtail in the shape of a question he never expected me to answer. The table runner was still in place from the night before, its stitched vines steady as a rule. I folded it carefully and slid it into the hutch as if it too needed rest. The doorbell rang at 10, a brisk businesslike sound that belonged to a weekday. I almost didn't answer. Most surprises arrive needing something you don't have. Through the peephole, I saw a man in a dark raincoat, the fabric still salted with yesterday's weather. He stood with his hands in his pockets, not rocking from foot to foot, the way impatient people do, just holding his place. "Ms. Hale," he asked when I opened the door on the chain. "Yes." "My name is Sebastian Cruz. I'm sorry to come without warning, but I think we should talk about Ava. There are names that invite you in and names that turn the air." I felt the chain draw a little under my hand. "What about her?" "It's not a quick thing," he said, "but I promise I'm not here to start a scene." He looked like a person who hadn't slept in a hotel bed. He trusted in a while, creases too sharp for mourning, a mouth practicing a restraint. I unlatched the chain and stepped back. "Come in," I said, "because if a storm has found your address, it's going to wait on the landing until you acknowledge it." We sat in the living room. The window made an honest rectangle of light on the rug. He stayed on the edge of the chair in the way of people who were raised to not overstretch their welcome. "I knew Ava as Nora Keene," he said. "When we lived together in Rochester 7 years ago, she was 2 months pregnant when she left. It was like hearing a song you almost knew the melody to, but not the words." I watched his face, which was not a face that enjoyed performing. He took a breath and went on. "I looked for her. I filed a report, hired a small-time investigator who kept his receipts in a cigar box, the whole pathetic kit. Nothing. Then last fall, a friend sent me a link to a community page with a photo of a school fundraiser down here. Jonah is in the front row. He's got a crescent scar just above the left eyebrow. Sebastian touched his own brow with a forefinger. I have the same one, though mine came from a bicycle, not a playground slide. He took a creased photograph from his wallet and placed it on my coffee table, a boy of 7 holding a paper kite hair cowlicked into obstinacy, a pale half-moon mark above the eye like punctuation. The resemblance to Jonah was not an overlay. It was that stubborn kind of echo you hear even when you try not to. How would you know Jonah's name, I asked, though I already knew the answer because information is a river that keeps widening if you step into it. Your daughter-in-law posts generously, he said not unkindly. She prefers captions about gratitude and motion blur of water. The children's names are in the comments from time to time. People can't help themselves. He set a manila folder on the table and loosened the string. Inside copies, not originals, utility bills from an apartment on Grove Street taken out by Nora Keene, a driver's license from New Jersey that carried Ava's face before it learned to smile a different way, a grainy wedding announcement for a civil ceremony upstate that lasted 14 months and ended with an annulment no one in the local paper had wanted to gossip about, a lease termination signed by a name I did not recognize. Heart that looked like Ava's handwriting had put on a slightly different coat. I don't say any of this to humiliate her, Sebastian said. I'm not proud of having a folder like this. I would have preferred to live out my life with fewer photocopies in it. But I can't not show you, and I can't not try to. He looked at the photograph and stopped himself before a word he did not trust. I poured coffee for both of us because that is a ritual that keeps a room from becoming a courtroom. He wrapped his hands around the cup without drinking. How certain are you? I asked. I bought one of those genealogy kits, and then another, and then I spoke to a genetic counselor, willing to translate numbers into cents. He gave a brief, self-directed smile. I am not reckless. The raw data suggests what it suggests. Just a close relationship between my family and Jonah's in a way that doesn't pass through you or Peter. It's not proof anyone would accept in a structured setting, but it's enough to make me stand at your door. The room did the thing rooms do. When they are asked to hold something heavy, it stayed absolutely still. My eye found the old clock on the bookcase. The second hand kept its stride. Sebastian didn't push. He didn't perform outrage or offer a script for me to read. He lifted his coffee and took a small swallow as if to demonstrate the cup could be trusted. I'm not here to blow up your family, he said finally. Whatever comes next is complicated enough without me putting adjectives on it. I want to know my son, and I want him to be safe. That's all I'm bringing through your door. I thought of the way Ava carved the world into smooth, manageable quarters, how she kept calendars and arrangements and narratives in neat stacks, how often I had set my own stories aside to make room for hers. I thought of my granddaughter holding up a friendship bracelet for me to admire, and of Jonah's gap-toothed whistle, and of Peter's laugh when he forgot to be careful. Leave the folder, I said. I'll look. If what you've brought holds up, I'll decide how to proceed. He rose, relieved and exhausted in the same movement. At the door, he hesitated. There's one more thing. If you choose to act, don't text, don't email, talk in person. She's attentive to the small print of people. When he'd gone, I stood in the doorway and watched the hallway light blink once and then hold. Fig walked figure eights around my ankles as if to knit the morning back into something usable. I spent the next hours and the day after in places that smell the way paper and electricity smell when they have worked beside each other for years. The county records office, the public library, the windowless room on the 3rd floor where old microfilm readers keep their green humanitarian glow. The clerks were kind in the professional way of people who cannot bend rules but know how to point you at what is public. The name Nora Keene lived in those stacks. Elise, a traffic ticket paid late. A small claims dispute over a security deposit resolved in her favor by a judge who seemed tired of landlords. An annulment petition that cited misrepresentation of material facts, which is the sort of phrase that sits on the tongue like a coin. A notice of name change from a county 2 hours north old enough to have yellowed at the corners. The photograph on the driver's license was younger, but the set of the mouth was Ava's when she was thinking of winning. I tried, because it is my temperament, to disprove each thing as I found it. Perhaps there were 2 women with the same agreeable bones and the same little scar under the chin from a childhood fall. Perhaps the date was misprinted. Perhaps the clerk misfiled. Every other perhaps dropped cleanly through the holes of the sieve. What remained in the mesh was the story Sebastian had brought to my coffee table. At the library, I asked for a quiet study room and spread the copies on the surface like a poor cartographer. I made a simple list in my fountain pen hand. Nora Keene, address lease utility. Civil ceremony annulled, file nomer. Name use E, heart lease termination. Driver's license photograph, Ava's face 10 years minus polish. Timeline, 7 years, Jonah's age. I am not good at many modern efficiencies, but I can keep a timeline straight. When I was a young mother with 2 jobs and a boy who needed shoes more often than other boys, I learned to stack verifiable facts like plates and check them for cracks. By late afternoon, the page carried more ink than white space. I packed the folder, tucked my list inside, and went home through a light that made the city look like a photograph from the 70s. Soft, unembarrassed, slightly gold at the edges. I walked 2 extra blocks so I could pass the corner florist. Daisies were in the bucket out front, heads cocked as if listening. At home, I set the folder in the hutch behind the glasses and stood for a time with my hands on the doorframe. It would have been satisfying to call Peter at once and read each line to him as if facts could function as an incantation. But my son is not a ledger. He is a person who believes things about the world in order to survive it. He loves his wife in the way loyal men do, believing the floor will hold because it is supposed to. I called Ruth instead. My sister hears the shape of your voice even over poor connections. Come over, she said before I'd asked. I'll make tea. Tell me from the start, no embroidery. Her kitchen is the size of a chessboard and twice as strategic. Clive listened, leaned back, and let his hands press flat to the table. He is a quiet man whose few sentences tend to land where they're aimed. 2 tracks, he said when I finished. One is proof that can live in a courtroom. The other is presentation that can live in a family. I don't want a courtroom, I said. That's the point, he said. Build as if for one, then speak as if for the other. Ruth shook her head, not at me, but at the pattern. You'll have to talk to him where his phone can't protect him, she said. And without giving her time to stage manage, ask them to supper. Simple, no balloons, no labels. I went home with a small bag of tea biscuits she insisted on handing me, and a sharper sense of how the next steps should feel in the body, not dramatic, not theatrical, simply steady. On my kitchen table, I laid the folder beside my list and wrote one more line, speak to Peter in person. That night, I dialed my son. He picked up on the 3rd ring voice, thick with the fatigue of a man who holds the door open for the world and then wonders why his arm aches. Mom. Everything okay? Come for supper, I said. Just you and Ava and the kids. Saturday 6. I'll keep it easy. He hesitated, and in the silence I heard the small communications of a household. The dishwasher door finding its latch, a child narrating the end of a puzzle, the quiet authority in Ava's tone when she thinks a plan might change without her. He covered the receiver briefly, and the muffled consultation traveled across my cheek like the draft under a door. Ava asks what the occasion is, he said when he came back. The occasion is I haven't seen my family, I said. I'd like to feed you. Another pause, then a softened exhale. All right, we'll make it work. I thanked him and ended the call before the conversation could sprout unnecessary branches. Then I set about the work that keeps hands from shaking. I ironed the runner, rolled the napkins, checked the wick length on the beeswax, and made a grocery list that read like a translation of memory: roast green beans, sesame loaf. In the drawer below the cutlery, I found the clip that keeps papers neat. I slid my list and the documents behind the stacked placemats, not hidden, not displayed, simply where they would be when I reached for them. On Friday in the late morning, I met Sebastian at a diner 2 avenues over, because diners are where people go to tell the truth without making a big thing of it. The coffee was passable and the orange slices too perfect to be anything but machine-made. He opened a new envelope, chain of custody forms, for a test he'd arranged through a lab that spoke in disclaimers and signatures. I recognized my own name where he'd left a space for a potential guardian's consent if it came to that. The neat bureaucracy of it steadied me. We should keep our communication small, he said. If you need me, call from a landline. If I need you, I'll come in person. I won't appear anywhere near your family without your say. I appreciate that I said and meant it. He didn't look like a man who made sport of ambushes. We spoke of timing without making a chart of where the children might sit, so they wouldn't be folded into words meant for adult mouths of the tone that asked for attention rather than flinging it. We agreed on nothing theatrical. If anger visited, it would take a number like everyone else. Back home, I opened the china cabinet and traced the rim of a plate with one finger. Plate by plate, I set the table not like a stage, but like a place people could occupy. I placed salt and pepper within reach because I do not assume my seasoning suits every tongue. I set the water glasses and decided against wine. Water tells the truth about thirst. In the last light, I sat with a pencil and wrote Peter's name on a fresh card. The ink bled the tiniest fraction into the stalk. I wrote Ava on another and let the dot over the A be a round, unjudgmental moon. Maya Jonah. I stacked the cards and slid them into the small bowl I keep for keys and half-legible receipts. Fig leapt softly onto the chair beside me and arranged himself with the air of a foreman satisfied that the job had been approached with care. I lifted the manila folder and weighed it in my hands. It didn't feel heavy. Paper almost never does until it speaks. I placed it inside the hutch just behind the crystal where the light through the glass turns edges into a line of mourning. Then I closed the door gently so the latch met itself without argument. Saturday arrived with a grayness that made the city's edges kind. I cooked the way you think, with your hands chopping without hurry tasting, with a wooden spoon that had a dent where my thumb fit. The roast went in first, then the green beans blanched and shocked so they would remember to be green. I set the runner, counted forks, trimmed the candle wicks. The manila folder waited in the hutch behind the crystal where light made its corners look less blunt. At 6, the bell sounded and the hallway gathered itself. I opened the door to my son's face. Peter, a shade thinner than last month, smile already apologizing. Ava stood beside him in a cream dress that knew its own lines. Maya and Jonah spilled forward with the rushing pleasure of children who recognize a place their bodies remember. Grandma Jonah threw his arms around my waist and pressed his cheek to the fabric of my dress. I can whistle with both teeth, now want to hear. After dinner, Ava said lightly, her hand already smoothing the back of his hair into cooperation. Maya held up her wrist where a braid of floss in greens and gold looped twice. I made you one, she said. It's not perfect because the cat tried to help. I like things cats have opinions about, I said, and slipped it into my pocket so I wouldn't mistake it for decoration. Ava glanced around the room with that management look she wore, so naturally a stranger might have mistaken it for warmth. Everything looks lovely, she said to the table, the candles, the edges to anything that might reflect her back. So thoughtful. We sat. The roast was tender and the bread warm enough for the sesame to wake. The children narrated their week in bright parcels. Maya's art project, Jonah's soccer scrimmage where the oranges were too cold and the coach said, "Cold oranges make you run faster," which Jonah doubted. Peter's laugh arrived late, but arrived. Ava touched his sleeve when he forgot to reach for the salt, corrected Jonah's napkin with 2 fingers, refolded Maya's straw wrapper into a tight little spiral, as if even paper should aspire to order. "What's the special occasion?" she asked halfway through the beans-toned conversational eyes direct. "The occasion is that I missed you," I said, "and I made too much cake." "Yes, cake," Jonah breathed, reverent as a pilgrim. Ava's smile held a picture fresh enough to still be wet. She did not mention beaches or palm trees or captions. The room kept an even temperature. Maya began a story about a poster sale at school, how the tables were set up in a maze and she and her friend kept getting lost in tigers with sunglasses. "We tried to text you a picture," she said to me, "but Dad said we should save it for when we see you in persons." "In person," Ava murmured. "In persons," Maya insisted cheerfully, and if a word could wag its tail, that one did. When the plates were mostly free of obligation, I set down my fork, folded my napkin, and looked at the 2 faces I had not made but had welcomed their lips the same shape when they pretended not to worry. "Kids," I said, "there are board games ready in the living room. Connect 4 is on the coffee table and the checkers are winning." 5 more minutes, Jonah asked, automatic Pavlovian. "Go ahead," Ava said quickly. "It's late already." "After games," I said, voice even. "We'll have cake." Ava's gaze held mine, neither of us blinking like people in photographs who know they'll be examined. She turned to the children. 15 minutes, she said, cheerful again, countable again. They ran down the hall with the sound of small thunder, and the apartment shifted into adult dimensions. I rose and crossed to the hutch, my steps not careful but deliberate. The folder came forward with a soft catch as if it had its own breath. I brought it back and set it by my water glass. Peter's brow folded the way it used to when he was little, and a math problem insisted on being a story. "Mamu, this is about names and dates," I said, "and about what they hold." Ava's smile endured a half-second longer than it wanted to and then adjusted. "Marion," she said gently, "if this is about the trip." "It isn't," I said, "though the timing is a kind of handwriting." She sat back as if the chair had developed a new angle. "All right," she said, "show us." I opened the folder. Not dramatically. Paper does not improve with theater. The top page carried the cautious fonts of a laboratory whose business was other people's relationships with their blood. Chain of custody forms clipped behind it said nothing out loud, but made every number stand straighter. Peter drew the page toward him, his mouth repeating words silently before his head allowed them a voice. He looked up once briefly at me like someone coming up for air between links. He reached for the second page, raw data columns translated into probabilities by a counselor whose signature included a neat slanted R that could have been anyone's initial but was not mine. "I don't understand," he said, voice careful as if the sentence might spill. "Why is this here?" "For clarity," I said. I slid the next piece forward. Driver's license, New Jersey, a photograph from 10 years ago of a face that had learned different poses since then. The mouth was Ava's until you looked too long. Then the lines rearranged themselves, and a woman named Nora Keene looked back with a gaze that did not yet know our table. Ava's fingers touched the edge of the photo and then withdrew. "That is not flattering," she said coolly, and the sentence draped itself over the document like a shawl pretending to be a curtain. The annulment notice went next, a story told in the constrained diction of courtrooms. A lease termination signed by E. Hart, a shape of handwriting that had vacationed in Ava's before coming home with souvenirs. A utility bill that thought names were outfits one could change when the weather demanded. "Nora," I said, and the name set down in the room like an extra place at the table. Ava's eyes flickered. It was a small thing, the kind of flicker that happens when a person remembers to be careful. My middle name is Eleanor, she said evenly. People have called me variations. That's a reach, Marion. Peter turned a page. His face was still doing math with words. A knock on the door came like a breath someone else had been holding. I stood and opened it, not to surprise anyone, least of all myself. Sebastian Cruz stood on the landing in a dark coat with the rain not quite gone from its seams. He held nothing visible. His expression had practiced stillness. "Come in," I said, and stepped back. Ava rose halfway. "What is this?" The charm in her voice overshot and hardened at the edges. "Mr. Cruz asked to speak," I said. I told him that if we spoke, it would be under my roof. Peter stood too fast for the chair, which protested against the floor. "Mom," he said, warning and pleading layered the way grief gets layered. Sebastian didn't approach the table. He stayed near the doorway as if the apartment might startle. "Peter," he said, and his tone held the courtesy you use with people who have a hard job ahead of them. "I'm Sebastian. I knew Ava under another name years ago. We lived together. She was pregnant when she left." Ava's laugh was soft at the beginning and then went flat. "We're not doing this," she said. "We are absolutely not doing this." Sebastian's gaze did not climb or descend. "I'm not here to punish anyone," he said. "I'm here because I recognize a scar above your son's left eye and because the numbers I paid someone to understand say I should stand in this doorway and feel foolish until I don't." Peter's hand tightened on the top of a chair. It looked like a man holding on to prevent motion. "Jonah," he said, but the word landed somewhere inside him where the chair could not help. The children's laughter came down the hall, a bright and ordinary sound, and then the clack of checkers remembering their squares. Maya called out that she'd found 4 in a row and asked whether that counted if Jonah wasn't looking. The ordinariness moved through the room like weather that refuses to change for your crisis. Ava's eyes went hot then cold. "This is grotesque," she said to me, "to drag strangers into our home, to humiliate us, to ruin a celebration that you insisted on having." "I didn't insist," I said. "I asked. I also set a table because I prefer things that support their own weight." She turned to Peter, gathering herself into the shape he has always known. "Look at me," she said quietly. "Don't look at them. Look at me. You know what your mother thinks of me. She has never understood that I keep this family organized. She resents that we made our own traditions. She's always resented the way I—" Peter lifted a hand and the gesture was not dramatic so much as final, like a page number when the chapter is exact. "Stop," he said. The word didn't shout. It cleared the air and left the furniture where it was. He sat, then stood again, then sat. He picked up the first page, then the second, then the photograph that didn't flatter. "Nora," he said the name, trying each of its syllables, as if they might belong to some other mouth. "Is this true?" Ava's jaw worked. I watched her look for a path that had always opened when she walked toward it. "People have histories," she said finally. "You have a history. I had a marriage I left because it was unsafe. I changed my name because I'm allowed to be safe. You told me you had never—" He stopped, rearranged his breath, started over. "You told me Jonah was mine. I told you what our life needed," she said, and the honesty of the sentence made the room look briefly like a stage with the lights too bright. She saw the effect and stepped away from it. "I don't owe Marion explanations," she added, using my name like a quiet accusation. "She has never liked the way I make decisions. She wants mess. I clean. She wants nostalgia. I make a calendar. She wants—" "Enough," Peter said, and this time the word carried the weight of a door finding its frame. Sebastian did a thing I liked him for. He looked at the shelf, the lamp, the book with its spine peeled from old use anywhere but at the man, whose life he was bisecting by standing where he stood. "I brought photographs," he said without taking them out. "I brought a report that means nothing without your consent. I brought my name. That's all." From the hall, Grandma— "Is it cake yet?" Jonah's voice elastic and hopeful. Soon I called back, and then I did what kitchens can't. I held a silence steady long enough for it to level the space. Peter lowered himself into the chair and put both hands on the table because the body sometimes needs the table more than the mind does. He looked at his wife, then at me, then at the folder, then at a point beyond all of us, where a boy's face existed with a scar that matched another boy's face, separated by years. He closed his eyes, opened them, and found the middle of his breath. "Jonah and Maya don't need to see any of this," he said. "They need cake and bedtime." Ava's chin flicked toward me, contempt picking up its hem. "You see," she said to Peter, "she's made this performative. She wants an audience." "No," Peter said. "I think Mom wants a table that doesn't lie." I rose and went to the doorway of the living room. Maya had arranged the red and black discs into a pattern prettier than any victory. Jonah was upside down on the sofa, head hanging a perspective improved by gravity. "Dessert," I said, which is the opposite of a lie when you mean it. We served cake in the kitchen, the pieces smaller because that's a kindness to small stomachs and hard nights. The children ate the sweet like work, efficient and pleased. Ava stood with her back against the counter, arms folded. Peter rinsed the plates they abandoned with the deliberate care of a man who needed a job that ended. When the children were in pajamas and had brushed teeth with toothpaste that insisted on being loud, I tucked them under the throw on the sofa and turned on the old cartoon they like, because a rabbit refuses to surrender his carrot. Maya asked if the bracelet would fit me. I told her it already did. In the dining room, the folder waited. Sebastian remained near the door hands in his coat pockets, the posture of someone who expected to be told to go at any moment and would understand when he was. Peter returned and did not sit. He put his palm flat on the folder. "Is there more?" he asked. The more didn't change the category of the thing, only its mass. "There is enough," I said. Ava exhaled through her teeth a precise sound. "This cannot be happening like this," she said. "Not in a room with mismatched chairs and a cat." And she stopped, turned her head as if to address a judge. In her mind came back to the table. "Peter, we will talk about this when the children are with my sister." "We will take a breath and we are breathing," he said. "Look at me. I'm breathing." Something in his voice made her straighten, then sharpen. "You're going to humiliate us," she said quietly. "Your mother has always wanted to split this family back into its components so she can feel needed again. She doesn't like that I keep the lists. She doesn't like that you have a life that asks you to say no sometimes. She doesn't like that you put your own household first. I like that I said because I knew the truth of it in my bones. I want him to put his people first." She ignored me. "You know me, Peter," she said soft now. "You know me when I'm a mess and when I'm triumphant and when I'm just Tuesday. You know my coffee order, my bad knees, the scar on my chin from when I was 4 and fell on the radiator. You know my voice when it's 3 a.m. and the children have fevers. That's what matters." "It all matters," he said. He slid the top page back toward the clip, squared its corner, and then failed to look at it again. "And there's this." Ava watched him the way a chess player watches a piece they can no longer defend. She reached for his hand. He did not move his. The distance between their fingers was not large, and it held every number the lab had translated for us. Sebastian, Peter said without turning. Are you? He stopped and started over. "Have you been waiting for this moment? Does it feel like winning?" "No," Sebastian said simply. "It feels like standing in the wrong room and hoping I'm not." Peter nodded once, as if some small part of him had needed that answer and had gotten it. He pressed his thumb to his eyelid, then the other, then looked at Ava. "Is your name Nora?" he asked. Silence sat down at the table again. "Yes," she said, and there was relief in the word, though relief is not always a kindness. I changed it because the old one was a lock with the key in someone else's pocket. "Is Jonah my son?" he asked. Another pause. The refrigerator hummed and then didn't. Fig chose that moment to jump from the chair to the floor, as if to remind the room that gravity still applied. "No," she said, and the sound of the truth was smaller than all the lies around it. Peter's hand came to his mouth, not to keep words in, but to steady the ones leaving. He made a sound I had heard only once before when he was a boy and his favorite teacher moved away without notice. He crossed to the window, opened it an inch, closed it again. Then he faced her. "You have to leave," he said. Not barked, not begged, said. Ava blinked. Now, he said. She looked at me, then at Sebastian, then at the hallway that would take her to the room where the children weren't sleeping yet, and for a heartbeat I thought she might try to move the furniture of the moment into a new arrangement. She didn't. She walked past us without collecting her coat. At the threshold, she stopped and turned. "You will regret letting her do this to us," she said to Peter, quiet, almost kind. "You will wake up and realize she needed a place more than we did." Peter did not answer. The door closed with the soft sound of a book closing where the bookmark is already placed. He stood still for a long several seconds. Then he moved to the doorway of the living room, looked at his children with their cartoon and their lemon sugar mouths, and something in his shoulders changed shape. "Thank you," Sebastian said to me under his breath, as if gratitude could be made whisper-sized and still count. He took a step back toward the hall. "I'll go." I nodded. "You have my number." He hesitated not to say anything that would turn the scene into more than it was just to hold the air with us for a moment. Then he let himself out as quietly as a person can leave a turning point. The apartment gathered itself around the empty chair. I took the folder, squared the pages, clipped them, returned them to the hutch where the light softened the edges again. In the living room, the rabbit outwitted the hunter with the same joke it had used for 50 years. Maya laughed in a way that made the air easier to breathe. Jonah asked for water, and Peter brought him a small glass, his hand steady. I blew out the candles one by one. Smoke drifted upward and unbraided, and the beeswax left that faint honey note that lingers after flame. The plates were easy to stack. The runner lay straight. The room made space for the quiet, and the quiet did not apologize for itself. By morning, the apartment had put itself back together. The runner lay folded. The plates were where plates go, and the beeswax wicks were small, clean buttons of ash. Peter came early, eyes swollen from a kind of sleep that doesn't count. He packed the children's overnight things into a canvas tote and stood a long time looking at the door as if it might give him a second version of last night with different dialogue. He kissed my cheek without speaking. Maya hugged me twice, once for me and once for Fig, she said, patting the cat with ceremonial gravity. Jonah whistled with 2 teeth and then one, demonstrating he could choose the world he used. In the weeks that followed, we learned the geometry of offices that exist for the purpose of untangling families. There were waiting rooms with carpet the color of oatmeal and clocks that ticked with firm municipal resolve. There were windows where you slid paper under the glass and waited for a stamp to make it official. Ava Nora on the forms arrived to the first appointment in a blazer that could have been a shield. She took a chair at the edge of the circle and kept her hands folded in her lap like a secret she wasn't sharing. Things became documents. There was a temporary order that said the children would stay with Peter while conversations continued. There was a mediation that lasted 3 sessions and produced an agreement tight as a buttoned coat custody to Peter parenting time to be requested in writing with notice, the kind of neutrality that is less a tone than a temperature. Lawyers spoke in the measured vowels of people trained to keep water from getting into boats. No one raised a voice. A few weeks later, Ava filed a change of address form with a zip code that didn't belong to the city anymore. When the envelopes stopped arriving, the apartment learned new sounds. On Sundays, Maya started a habit of bringing daisies from the bodega, $2 a bunch, stems wrapped in wet paper like a small secret. She'd thrust them at me with the dignity of a messenger. For the table, she'd say. I trimmed them and put them in the same glass each week, the one with a chip at the rim you only notice if you insist on it. Sebastian kept his promise to step lightly. The first time Jonah saw him outside our doorway was at the playground, a place chosen because swings and slides give children somewhere to put energy that has nowhere else to live. Peter introduced him without embroidery. "This is Sebastian," he said. "He used to know your mom. He would like to know you." Jonah studied the grown man who stood as if he were practicing how to be a tree. "Do you know how to whistle?" he asked finally. "Very badly," Sebastian said, "but I can learn." They tried together on the bench beside the sandbox, the air filling with whistles that were almost whistles. After a while, Jonah pointed at Sebastian's eyebrow. "I have a scar," he said, tapping his own. "From the slide." "Mine's from a bicycle," Sebastian said, tapping in the same place. "I didn't listen when someone told me the gravel was not a friend." "I don't listen either," Jonah said, satisfied to have found a family trait that cost nothing. The second time they met, it was at the school art fair, where tables bowed under the weight of painted pasta and papier-mâché animals with existential eyes. Maya dragged Sebastian by the sleeve to see a watercolor of a tiger in sunglasses. "He is fierce and relaxed," she said. Sebastian agreed this was rare and admirable. He bought 2 raffle tickets and lost both with good manners. The city kept its routines. Peter went to work and came home in time to make dinner on nights when work allowed. On other nights, I sent Tupperware by taxi with a note tucked under the lid labels that read roast or soup instead of sentences. He began to look less like a person braced for an impact already absorbed. He developed an efficient expertise in small braided chores, hair pulled smooth for school photographs, socks paired during cartoons, permission slips returned before they could wrinkle into apology. Sometimes he would drop by after bedtime, sit at my table, and let the silence do the work of language. Once he said, "I didn't see what I didn't want to see," and I nodded because some sentences don't need audiences larger than one. Spring slid into the kind of New York June that smells faintly of hot stone and street basil. On a Thursday, Maya stood in my doorway holding a paper crown she'd made out of a math worksheet. "You're Queen of Sunday," she declared, and placed it on my head with the solemnity of a coronation. From then on, Sunday dinner had less ceremony and more rhythm. Peter brought sesame bread out of habit now. Sebastian learned where the napkins lived and retrieved them without asking. The children monitored the distribution of pie slices with the seriousness of dock workers logging cargo. Sometimes Ava called. When she did, she spoke to the children with a voice that had learned to travel distances. She asked for photographs from recitals and updates on loose teeth. She told them about a dog she was fostering and a park where you can see bats if you stay very quiet. The calls were short and careful. After Maya put her phone down gently like something that might bruise and asked for a daisy for her room, Jonah whistled not to show off, just to fill air that needed something in it. On a wet Monday, Sebastian and Peter stood in Jonah's classroom together for Family Day while the teacher read a book about sandwiches. Children took turns announcing who had come for them: my aunt, my grandma, my neighbor who was like a cousin, and then Jonah, who lifted his chin and said, "My dad and my Seb." The teacher smiled as if this were exactly the language intended, and it became so. Later on the walk home, Jonah ran ahead and counted puddles as successes rather than obstacles. He asked if he could show Sebastian the good tree for climbing. He specified it was not the best tree because the best tree belonged to a squirrel. Evenings at my place learned new pacing. Nina Simone still took the corner speaker when it was her turn. The runner kept its stitched vines. I set 4 plates and then 5 and then sometimes 6 depending on schedules and moods and the weather's opinion of commutes. Fig discovered that Sebastian was reliable in the matter of chin scratches and allowed himself a friendship. Ruth and Clive folded into this with the ease of people who prize chairs that can be added without apology. Ruth brought jars of apricot jam that held summer even on soupy nights. Clive taught Maya how to fix a wobbly table leg with a sliver of cardboard so thin you'd think it couldn't possibly matter. Maya, who appreciates elegant solutions, declared him a wizard. The manila folder remained where I'd put it, behind the crystal, its edges softened by light. Weeks passed when I didn't touch it. Once in July, I dusted the hutch and lifted the folder out to wipe the surface beneath. I felt the weight which hadn't changed and set it back down. It existed the way some stories exist after they end, not in front of you, not erased. One warm Sunday we ate outside at the small table by the window I insisted on calling a balcony. The city's late sun fell sideways through the fire escape. Maya threaded a new bracelet onto my wrist, pinks and golds this time. This one is for no reason, she said, which was reason enough. Jonah placed 3 checker pieces in a triangle and claimed to have invented a new game. He named it Triangles and explained the rules while inventing them. After pie, Peter stayed behind with me to wash dishes. We worked in the rhythm we had learned years ago when he was a boy. I washed, he dried the air warm with steam and the sweet, faint residue of orange blossom icing. He took a glass, turned it in the towel, and said I should have come to you sooner. I handed him a plate. You're here, I said, and we let the water run. When the sink was empty and the counter wiped, we moved to the window with 2 small glasses of water because water is honest about what it is. The night had settled like a shawl. A siren went past without urgency. Somewhere below, someone laughed long and then stopped. We didn't speak for a while. People think conversation is words. Sometimes it is what you are willing to hold without naming. The children fell asleep, tangled at opposite ends of the sofa, Maya with an open book across her chest, Jonah with one sock halfway off. Sebastian lifted Jonah carefully and Peter lifted Maya, and together they did that quiet choreography-like walk to the door. Peter came back alone to collect the tote bag, and in the doorway he paused, not to say anything monumental, just to take the room in the daisies, bent slightly toward the glass, the runner straight, the cat, a comma on the chair. After they left, I cleared the last crumbs with the side of my hand and shook the runner gently so the stitched vines made their soft, obedient wave. The apartment exhaled. I turned off the overhead light and left the lamp by the sofa on. In the kitchen, I washed my hands, and when I dried them, the faint smell of orange lingered the way a note sometimes hangs after the song has ended. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.